welcome. If you're getting food, continue to get food and help yourself, and then you can come and get yourself settled. But we have a really exciting, wonderful evening planned today, and so I want to get us on the road to that evening. By way of introduction, my name is Yael Shai, and I'm the Senior Director of Global Spiritual Life at New York University. Global Spiritual Life, for those of you that don't know, is an open, authentic, vibrant community at the forefront of international conversations on religion and spirituality. And Mindful NYU is the umbrella organization underneath Global Spiritual Life that holds all of our mindfulness, meditation, contemplative programming. Our mission is to offer environments and tools for transformative multi-faith and spiritual encounters at NYU and beyond. We have meditation nearly every day of the week, including affinity meditations for people of color and for LGBTQ meditations, as well as meditations that are open to the community, NYU and outside Greenwich Village community. We have yoga twice a day, every day, all free for the NYU community. So if you have not yet come to one of our sessions or our classes, there's no better time than tomorrow. So the postcards are out front. I want to also highlight two special events that we have coming up fairly soon. We have a half-day meditation and yoga retreat for people of color on April 9th. And we have an Ayurveda workshop on April 18th that is open to the community, and just those are filling quickly, so sign up if you haven't yet. You can go to the Mindful NYU Facebook page or to our website. I want to thank, before I get into our amazing speakers and guests, I want to thank our co-sponsors of this event, the Stern Leadership Development Program, with whom we partner on our Mindfulness in Business program, and the NYU Leadership Initiative. I also want to thank the GSL staff, chaplains, and students who are here and have helped put this event on a very quick timeline. Emily Mervish, Ariel Ennis, Rekha Prasad, Megan Montgomery, Arif Khalil, Brian Young, Michelle Wong, Kirsten Richard Garcia, and Dwayne Park. I hope I didn't forget anybody, but thank you all so much. Thank you. And now for our fabulous speakers. I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Amishi Jha, who was really the connector to getting this entire program started. She's a neuroscientist, a researcher, and an associate professor at the University of Miami. She's the director of the Contemplative Neuroscience for the U Mindfulness Initiative. Contemplative Neuroscience for the U Mindfulness Initiative. She's an internationally recognized speaker who has lectured at the World Economic Forum, the Aspen Institute, the Pentagon, the New York Academy of Sciences, and many, many other places, including many media sources. Her topics that she lectures on are optimizing attention, building brain fitness, mindfulness, and other forms of contemplative training. Major General Walter Piatt from the U.S. Army is here as well. He attended Lock Haven University and graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree in biology. He commissioned as second lieutenant in 1987. His military education includes the School of Advanced Military Studies and a fellowship with the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. He served in numerous assignments all over the world, including tours in Korea, Panama, Hawaii, and Alaska, and has completed several operational deployments, including in Suriname, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Afghanistan, and Iraq, and he's published 2 books about his experiences in Afghanistan. He's finishing his current tour at the Pentagon, where he serves as the Director of Army Operations Readiness and Mobilization and as the Director of Operations, Army Rapid Capabilities Office. And very soon, actually in a couple of weeks maybe, he'll be transferring to Fort Drum in New York. He will assume command of the 10th Mountain Infantry Division. So happy to have him. And finally, but last but definitely not least, we have the incredible David Gellis here. We've had him here for other programs, and one of the best moderators we've ever had for any program ever. So really excited to have you back. David is newly an editor at the New York Times. He previously wrote the Revalued column and other features for the Sunday business section of the New York Times. He also, before joining the Times, he spent 5 years at the Financial Times. He's the author of Mindful Work, which I highly recommend, an amazing book published in 2015, which brought together his 15 years of meditation practice and his work as a business journalist. He lives in New York City with his wife and very cute 2 children. And I'll turn it over now to David, and we'll get going. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Okay. So right before we walked on stage, I put Amishi on the spot, and I said, well, if we're going to talk about mindfulness, wouldn't it be appropriate if we practice just a little? So as we were walking up, I said, just 1 or 2 minutes. So with that, before we get into a talk about mindfulness, leadership, the military, I've asked Amishi if she would just lead us in a couple brief moments of practice.
Now can you hear me? Okay, good. All right, great. So this is unusual for me because I'm usually in the scientist role, not the teacher, practitioner role as well, but not in the teacher role. But I really think David's right, so I think let's do what we're going to talk about for a few minutes. And I just invite all of you to, if you're comfortable, sit in a kind of upright, alert posture. You can keep both feet on the ground, that'll probably feel good. And if you're comfortable, just lower or close your eyes. For the next few moments, I just invite you to pay attention to the sensations of your breath. Pick something in particular, something that's prominent for you. So the feeling of your breath moving in and out your nostrils, or maybe your abdomen moving in and out, your shoulders, pick something in particular. And that's where I'd like you to rest your attention for the next few moments. And if it hasn't happened already, you'll certainly maybe experience your mind wandering. And when that happens, just gently return your attention back to the breath. Next moment or two, we'll end our brief practice. I just invite you to, when you're ready, go ahead and open your eyes again and return your attention back to the room. Thank you.
Thank you, Amishi. So that is basic mindfulness practice, and that is what scientists have now been studying for a few decades, and we're starting to learn what happens in our brain when we do that kind of work. And it's also what the military, perhaps surprisingly, is starting to incorporate into some of their readiness training. Yael mentioned I wrote a book called Mindful Work, and that really stemmed from my interest in this broader popularization of mindfulness practices. And I initially started seeing mindfulness meditation show up in the boardroom. CEOs had started practicing several years ago, and then I learned that there in fact was this big universe of contemplative neuroscience, the study of the effects of meditation on the brain. And then I heard that they were teaching it in schools, and that in fact athletes were starting to come to meditation. And then I was perhaps most surprised when I learned that mindfulness and meditation were actually being taught in the military, the Marines and the Army most prominently as well. And so I'm delighted to be here to have a conversation exploring this connection between neuroscience, meditation, and why on earth that's something that is appropriate and actually perhaps even necessary for our armed forces. I want to start with just a little background. So what was happening in our brains when we did that? I mean, you should just tell us a little bit about your own career, your interest in neuroscience, and how we've come to start actually studying what's happening in our brains when we do that basic meditation practice.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. One of the things to keep in mind is that, the primary aspect of the instruction was attention, and that sort of continued throughout. The second piece you might have noticed is that I said select something in particular, right? And then for the few minutes we did this, I said hold your attention there. And the third piece was essentially notice when the mind gets movement away from that focus, notice your mind wander and return it. And those three sort of aspects, the selection, the maintaining, and the noticing of mind wandering, I would say are part of sort of circuit training for our brain with these practices. And I don't know if I'll mention this, but I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, so all the work in my lab has to do with understanding how the brain pays attention and how we might train it to be better at that. So in some sense, what we can do now is look at the circuits that are starting to be known that are responsible for selecting information, maintaining information, and controlling mind wandering to see how it is that they may be strengthened in some cases or weakened in other cases when it has to do with mind wandering itself as people are practicing. And so far the evidence is very small, but in the direction that it looks to be the case, that the brain is affected by this in a tractable way so we can continue to study it.
And just to be clear, you were interested in cognitive neuroscience quite apart from your interest in meditation, right?
Oh yeah, that's what was kind of a happy coincidence for me, is that this was already part of my interest. Attention was my interest, and that means that that's the lens I'm going to bring to applying to this space of mindfulness training. That's also what interested me about working in the military context, because it seemed to me as a complete outsider to the military that this is something that soldiers may need.
Absolutely. Now, Walt, tell us a little bit about your career, just as a level setting. Walk us through your tenure in the Army up until, say, 2009, which is when you first got introduced to meditation. What had you been doing up until that point?
A lot. I enlisted in the Army when I was 17. I was from Western Pennsylvania. Grew up in Pittsburgh. My father worked in a steel mill. So I was enlisted for a few years when I went to college and then came back in. And I have been a soldier my entire adult life. And on 9/11, I was in here. I was in upstate New York at Fort Drum when we watched the terrible attacks on our nation, and the flight in Pennsylvania hit 8 miles from where I grew up. I was deployed shortly thereafter and have been on the every other year cycle really through 2010, and then I've had other assignments in Europe where I was in Ukraine when the Baltimore fell, and reminded our Army that the land wars in Europe are not totally impossible. We watched one unfold. And now in the Pentagon, I've worked with Director of Operations and trying to help the Army modernize and to be able to deter the threat of future war. But in 2009, as I said, I was on this cycle of deploying every year. Gone a year, come back a year. Every year I came back, my wife would already know what day I was leaving, every year. And every time we came back, we saw the same problems occurring with soldiers every time. The only difference is it would happen faster. We would come back from deployment, we spent a lot of time, energy, and resources in trying to reintegrate our soldiers back into life and back to normalcy, and we were failing miserably. We would sit them in a classroom like this and give them instruction on not to spend the money they made during deployment, do not buy a fast motorcycle, do not go out and drink a year's worth of alcohol as you've been forbidden to drink in one night, don't go home and punch your spouse, and they would do all. And so we kind of knew what we were doing wasn't working. And that's when a medical colonel introduced me to Amishi and Liz Stanley. And the first day I met them in our headquarters, they spent about 5 minutes explaining what stress over time does if you don't learn to regulate it, and if you can't pay, what it do to your ability to pay attention and act in stressful moments. And right then, the command sergeant major of the brigade, I was a colonel at the time, we both sat back. And we knew they had just described us. It was my eye-opening moment that that I wasn't dealing with stress very well. I was multitasking. My mind wanders at an incredibly high rate, and we actually think that's a good thing. And they kind of slowed us down and just taught us a whole new way to not just deal with the stresses of post-traumatic events, but also how to train and be prepared before you enter a traumatic event, and that can really help the outcome of that event. So that's when it really literally was minutes of just listening to Dr. Jha explain what was happening in our brains, and Liz Stanley, who were just so, credible to us, that we knew we had found something that could change and make a real difference in soldiers' lives who have to deal in these very complex environments, and then come home and try to reintegrate back to their families after dealing with it.
And Amici, how was it that you actually made the connection between your interest in contemplative neuroscience and the military, which again, is not the most obvious connection?
No, it's certainly not. I mean, for me, I was already interested because of my own journey to meditation. Mindfulness meditation came through my own journey with stress. So I already knew that it's very helpful. And also, I knew that offering it to people during periods of time in which they're experiencing extremely high levels of stress may be best, because that's where they're most likely, their attention and working memory are most likely to fail them. So if we could provide some kind of training to buffer against the costs of that stress, maybe we could really make them resilient in a more fruitful way. So, I mean, the kind of logical argument was already there. I'd been working with other high-stress groups, like medical students at that point. And I met, as Walt mentioned, Dr. Liz Stanley from Georgetown University.
Tell the audience briefly
Sure,
who she
so
is, 'cause
Liz-
she's got an incredible story
Yeah,
herself.
she herself is sort of a unusual, compelling person. And she's a professor at Georgetown University and specializes in security studies, and also a longtime mindfulness practitioner herself, and also a veteran. I mean, she was in Army. She's actually a daughter of the American Revolution and a veteran herself. So she had both of these.
I believe she's a fourth-generation military family.
Oh my gosh, okay.
She's quite incredible.
Yeah. So the thing that was interesting about Liz is that, I had this very strong interest in mindfulness and its applications in high stress. But what I needed was a partner who could offer the training in a compelling way that would relate to the populations we wanted to work with. So she was a wonderful, collaborator in that regard. And our first project was actually, we did without DoD funding. We actually got our own funding to do it, and became sort of really compelled to try to figure out how we're going to offer the training. And then through that, we have been able to get a series of grants to pursue this. And by the time we met, then Colonel Piatt, now General Piatt, obviously, but we were really at the point where we had received the funding. This is just kind of interesting, for students in the room. I mean, you work really hard, you get a grant, and then you still have to figure out who's going to accept the grant funds to execute the project. So we were a year in, and one of the challenges was that our grant asked for a lot of training time, and we wanted it in the pre-deployment phase. So people, pre-deployment, I mean, busy every minute. And we said we want 24 hours over 8 weeks, which doesn't seem like a lot. Like a mindfulness-based stress reduction course is around 40, double that. But it was very hard to get it, and thankfully, we found an enlightened leader.
So your
said, "Let's
interest
give it
was
a shot,"
piqued.
yeah.
Your interest was piqued when you had that conversation, but then you had to go back to the Pentagon and say, "Hey guys, I want to teach our troops to meditate." How did that conversation go?
Not well. Actually, I didn't tell them. So the Army asked me if I needed what we call an execution order. The Pentagon issues an order from the Army that tells the unit to do something. I said, no, don't do it, I've got it. I'm a brigade commander, I'm the most powerful guy in the universe, I can pull this off. And it was a little cocky, but the Army was serious about helping soldiers, so I took initiative. But then when my boss found out, my immediate supervisor, the division commander, it was not a good conversation. I mean, he really pushed back on me, and really, what are you doing? This is crazy. But the soldiers never did.
What was his specific concern? Did he just think it was all hooey?
It wasn't so, it was two things. One, that I signed up without asking to do anything. And the other one was, we have a program, we have to do it. And I really argued back, well, that we've been doing it for years and it's not working. We've got to try something out. But I knew I wasn't going to convince him. So I said to Amici on, and she calmed him down. Once he met her and Liz, they're just brilliant people, and they're compelling. They lay out a really compelling argument that that there's something to your brain that you're just not seeing and doing, and you can practice and train ways to get mental fitness, not just physical fitness. So the military, I mean, physical fitness, it makes so much sense to us. We will protect that time because we see the results immediately. So if you run, you do push-ups, we get tested on it. We have to stay at a high level of fitness. But we know we need mental fitness, but we just don't have a good method to do it. This opened a door, but it really was, I couldn't convince him, but they did. And when they saw what the soldiers were doing, and that the soldiers actually liked it, it was very helpful. Because Liz, Stanley, and Mishi, they could explain what we were experiencing, and we couldn't explain it. And we were actually, sometimes we were afraid of these feelings we were having. Why were we getting angry at red lights? Why were we, why can't we listen? Why do loud noises scare the crap out of us? Why are all these things happening to me? I would just immerse myself in the work in the next deployment and be right back on the roller coaster. But some soldiers didn't have that. They were spiraling out into disorder. And here we had someone that could, teach us how to slow this down and recognize that these actually were normal feelings we were having. It wasn't something psychologically wrong with us. That's very broad, but I was convinced in a second, and I knew that if we followed the science, that it would prove that we were right. And I can see that early on. I know this will take a long time to convince everyone on the science of it, but I was convinced very early. And it was easy to start then convincing others. But by no means can I suggest that the Army and the Pentagon has adopted this as the best way to train mentally. We still are having that debate, but I'm not giving up.
And you said the soldiers kind of bought into it relatively quickly, but I suspect that's kind of glossing over some of it. There must have been some reluctance among the troops.
There always is. Time is sacred, and when we take a soldier's time away from them, they want to see some benefit, and it's hard to see it right away.
Is it really just about the time, or was there some innate skepticism of meditation?
I think there was, and there wasn't. I think it's obvious we think that the military would push back on meditation right away.
Do you call it meditation?
Well, we call it mindful fitness, so we call it mental fitness is really what folks will call it, but once they do it, so well, this is like meditation, isn't it? So, but it's really focused on mental fitness. But I think what gets them is because we do a lot of these slow techniques to learn how to use shoot a weapon the right way. We learn how to do things where we kind of slow it down so we can be in that moment. But we didn't know how to perfect that. So it wasn't uncommon for a soldier to hear that, hey, if you focus, this will help you pay better attention. And then they could see that this had great interest from a lot of top athletes. That really appealed to soldiers. We have a lot of time, anytime a new fitness fad comes out, we could bring it on, a senior Army official could come down and say, here's the new fitness fad. It could be identical. Soldiers won't like it unless, it's coming in from CrossFit. It was really neat, but we had been doing CrossFit techniques for years. It was militarized, so it wasn't interesting. But CrossFit came in, they saw that other athletes were doing it, they could see the physical benefits, they jumped on it. So the fact that athletes were doing it and they were saying that this will help you be at your best when things are at their worst. You want to be in the moment. You want to be able to pay attention and not be overreacting because you're just so stressed that you can't see things clearly. That really struck a nerve to them. Soldiers, want to perform at high output levels. They want to be able to pay attention so they can protect their buddy, not overreact on the wrong targets. All these things that they're in these incredibly difficult situations. They want to make sure they can discern friends and foes and threats from non-threats, and it's very difficult. It's a very difficult thing to do. So once they were exposed to that, many of these, I think almost all of them had 3 deployments or so at this time. They were ready for something. They weren't as resistant. That was my view.
Yeah, and I think that's in line with what we saw on the research side, because essentially what we found was that those that had had more prior deployments were more open. And also, absolutely, there were the resistors, as you might put it. And in our first study, even before we worked with General Piatt's group, we found that the benefits that we were seeing in attention and working memory, in their own reported mood, were tied to how much practice time they had during the program that they did. And this was even before they were deployed. And then when they came back, we tested them again, and what I noticed is that, overall, the more they practiced before they were deployed, the more they benefited. But there were some people in that, and those that didn't practice, not only did they not benefit, they got worse in their attention over time. as you might expect going through a high-stress situation. But what was kind of interesting is that when they came back from their deployment, I was really curious about that low practice group. I mean, did they continue to go down? And a subset of that group actually got better. So that was like really confusing. Like, you know, and I had all kinds of like elaborate theories, like, oh, the purpose of their mission got them kind of, you know, excited their minds to be more present or something like that. Well, that was all wrong. But I asked Liz, I said, look, there's this subset of people that actually look better than before they were deployed. Is there anything unusual about them? She's like, oh yeah, those are the guys that contacted me while they were in Iraq. And I was like, what? Which I didn't know, but apparently some of the resistors were noticing that unlike themselves, who weren't sleeping through the night or were getting a lot of the shakes and were not having a good time, they approached the guys that were paying attention and doing the practices beforehand. It was like, what did you learn? And they're like, well, just learn it. So they actually started practicing and learning while they were deployed, which I think was, to me, that's very compelling. Because anytime I go anywhere and, you know, tell people about mindfulness training, they're like, oh, I just don't have any time. Like, if a Marine in Iraq while deployed can start learning it, you can figure out how to give yourself 12 minutes a day.
So you talk about the benefits, but can you be more specific? When
Yeah,
you say
sure.
the benefits,
Sure,
what
sure.
specifically are we saying is happening to these guys
Right.
when they're deployed?
So, you know, in the broader field of mindfulness research, we're learning a lot about the benefits, right? That we can parse into benefits on physical symptoms, if people have some type of physical ailment, or psychological illnesses like anxiety, depression, PTSD, or even in the context of relationships. So the broader field is learning a lot about the benefits of mindfulness training programs in sort of normal civilian life. As I said at the outset, because I'm an attention researcher, that was my window in. And there were a couple of things that we knew. We know that if people have poor attention, poor sustained attention, and lots of mind wandering, that their mood's going to be worse, right? We know that we knew that before, you know, having nothing to do with the military. So bad attention, bad mood, and poor attention, you experience something called perceptual decoupling, which is essentially your eyes are perceiving, your brain is not perceiving as much as it would be if you were paying attention. So already you're missing the information. Within a couple of hundred milliseconds of seeing an image, you're seeing less of it. Now, that seems like it has a lot of relevance for what would be happening during the deployment. So I knew attention would probably be vulnerable. The other thing is that working memory, which is sort of I would say the sister system of attention, which is this ability to maintain and manipulate information over short periods of time. What we know is that when people have poor working memory, they have poor emotion regulation. And they actually engage in some strange and unpleasant things. I mean, there's a recent study that just came out that said poor working memory is tied to reactive parenting, where people are more likely to be physically and verbally abusive to their children. Poor working memory means that you're more likely to engage in prejudicial behavior toward personally unliked groups. So both of those to me were already areas that I could see the relationship to what might be useful. And those are the tasks that we gave them. So we gave them a battery of attention and working memory tasks. We looked at their mood, we looked at their stress level before they got the training, and then 8 weeks later after, and then in some cases after they came back from deployment. And what we saw is in this high stress interval of preparing for deployment, if we did nothing, attention and working memory and mood got worse. And that was before they were deployed. Just preparing to deploy did that. If we gave them the mindfulness training and they practiced sufficiently, they could stay stable. Some practiced enough where they even got better than when they started. So that's the specifics.
And what does this look like in the field? You've seen combat, you've been deployed. What does it look like when a soldier is out there and is responding, not reacting, using some of these techniques? And what does it look like when unfortunately they're perhaps just reacting, not taking advantage of all these tools?
Well, it's ugly, and what I've seen, because I didn't make the cut for the study. They picked 200 folks from my brigade, and I didn't make the cut. So, but Dr. Stanley gave me the program. I had to go through it myself, and then spent a year with her at Georgetown the following year, which was very helpful. But I was able to reflect back on instances within our many deployments where being in that moment made all the difference. It didn't make the headlines, and I have several stories. One I would tell often is we went to a village that was on the border, and it was a very dangerous place. And
What country were you in?
This was in Afghanistan. It's right on the Paktika province in Afghanistan. And we'd been there a while, and we've been trying to get into this village. They wanted some medical supplies and to see some doctors, and we had female doctors, which was really helpful in Afghanistan so that the female population could get seen. So it was a very good day. We spent the day there. The village was very happy that the doctors were there. We didn't do any military operations. We really stayed inside. Had some time with the mayor. But as we left, the kids lined the street as they always do to wave at you, and hopefully we'll throw some pencils at them or something. And they're waving. And on our last vehicle, a hand grenade was thrown on our last vehicle. And the gunner, he's up in the turret of the Humvee, and he does what he's trained to do. He jumps down into his turret, and he yells grenade. The grenade luckily didn't go into the vehicle. It rolled down in the back and lodged in one of our backpacks that we'd carry on there. And that kind of muffled the explosion, but it exploded. But as soon as it exploded, he did exactly as he's trained to do, is to go back up and reman his weapon. He acquired the target that he saw through the grenade, and in a split second decided not to shoot. By the rules of engagement, he had every right, by the rules of law, law of warfare, to engage this individual. But talking to the soldier afterwards, it was a very small chow. There were children everywhere. His weapon was a machine gun. He probably would have killed the young boy, and he would have wounded, if not killed, many more. We went back to the village, and the village was then very scared. They looked like we were going to storm the village and arrest every man. And I just backed down and went up to the mayor and the police chief and said, find the person responsible. We're not going to search your village. This is your village. You find the person responsible. We came here goodwill. So we stayed there for hours, spent the night in the village, and obviously they weren't finding anyone. So I said, well, bring them to the base camp. And I promise, we'll deal with it from there. Knowing they never would. And we would come back in a couple of weeks and try to pick up the pieces. Well, a week later, they actually came to the camp. The village elders brought this young boy responsible for throwing this grenade on a vehicle, and he must have been maybe 10, 11 years old. And they brought his father with them, and all the elders said, we're coming here, this is the boy who did it, we ask you to arrest his father and let us take him back to the village, and we promise he'll never attack the soldiers again. And in that instant, I can only think of my own father, who had passed before the deployment, and I saw the love that he had for his son, and so it connected us. And I just decided then that we would take a different approach. And we took the young boy and we introduced him to the soldier that he threw the grenade at. It was pretty risky. That soldier had a temperament that dealt with it. He said, yeah, come in, we'll give you a ride around in the vehicle. This young boy, we learned a lot from it. There was a lot of intelligence that we learned why this happened. He was forced to do it, his parents were threatened, that village was threatened, and he did what he thought he had to do. But they found out that we connected at a very human level that day. And we won that battle without pulling that trigger. And I tell that soldier all the time, it was the most decisive act you did as a soldier. But soldiers are put in that environment every single day. And they don't know friend or foe. The threat can get as close because they'll dress as civilians, they'll act normally, and then they'll strike at a time that's convenient or the most advantage to them. The soldier has to be ready. He has to be able to look out into a crowd like this and be able to see that threat, but more importantly, see where there's not a threat. And if he has to use lethal force, he has to do it with surgical precision to eliminate any possible collateral damage. So you have to be in that moment. You have to not be blinded by stress to perceive something else that's not out there. Another example I would share, because it hit me to this day on this soldier, his ability to have a clear mind in the craziest time. We had been in Afghanistan 3 months this time, same province, Paktika. We had done numerous operations at very high altitudes and found Al-Qaeda foreign fighter base camps and captured some very, very bad people. We got an intelligence report again on another objective on this mountain, and we were actually cleared to just bring in a bomber and put rounds on this target. And I waved it off. I said, no, if they're up there, we're going back to get them like we did every time. We can gain from the intelligence, we can rid this country from these evil foreign fighters. We went up 11,000 feet, it's tough. It started to snow, we got near the objective, and the planes were overhead reminding me that I didn't need authority to drop. I could drop, and they only had so much time left on station. I kept waving them off. But the snow allowed us to get close to the objective, and we could see right away there were tents set up. We had just done this the last 2 months. We had just hit a target in this very vicinity, and it looked very much the same. And as we got closer, the scout that was in his position to see the objectives, describing it perfectly. Here I have 3 tents. It's snowing, we don't see anybody out. Then, wait a minute, I see an individual. We got 2 males moving around, guarding the perimeter. Everything was coming into place. The intelligence couldn't be more perfect. We had it all the way down from Central Command in Tampa that this was an enemy encampment. Planes were already clear to drop bombs. And then the soldier said on the radio, and I'll never forget, he said, "Sir, I don't see any weapons." And it was, I paused just like I did there. And it's just not something we were ready to hear. Everything was coming together. And then the sergeant, who was one of our best soldiers in our battalion, said, "Sir, there aren't any weapons. These 2 guys don't have any weapons." So we're still thinking, they're just stupid bad guys now. They're just out without weapons. He goes, I think we can just grab them. They don't even know we're here. We'll just grab them and we'll move in quick. I said, "Let's go." We went. They tackled the 2 individuals. We ran up into the tents thinking people were going to come out at any moment shooting at us, and we were ready to shoot back. But the only thing that came out was a rather large female who was clearly in charge that day and was clearly mad at me for snatching her 2 men that were up there. And she started hitting us and speaking a language we couldn't understand. We started to communicate, and we found that this was a Bedouin tribe that had come over this mountain, for frankly, maybe thousands of years, who knows, and they would move wherever to get their livestock to just a greener pasture to graze. And they were camping there for a few days. It was a tough pass. And they invited us in for tea, and it was god-awful. I mean, it was really a very austere environment, but it was really bad. And the little goats were nibbling at my ear in this tent. It was like a scene from the Bible or some Bible movie. But it dawned on me because I looked them in the eye and I said, we could have killed these people. I could have killed them when I'd gone up that mountain, and people would have just been an objective done. But we went to do it. But that young man who saw everything, we were all seeing the same thing, but somehow he saw something very different. And to be able to do that, because he had been a seasoned soldier, he had been in combat several times, he had been at these altitudes, he'd seen these Al-Qaeda campsites, he knows how dangerous this is. So at the time, you're taking on a very serious fighter, you're pretty amped up. He wasn't. He saw it very clearly, saying, "Sir, they don't have any weapons." That happened a lot for us throughout that year. I told the soldiers before we deployed, I said, "We can win this war without killing one more person. You've got to be able to know how to use force correctly, both lethal and non-lethal. We've got to build more than we destroy, or we're never going to give these people hope, because it was a very, very bad place." But I continue to push those stories because that's what our soldiers have to have. Because this world is still a very dangerous place, and we're going to put them in very dangerous. And if we overuse force on the wrong target, we'll build sympathy for the enemies of our nation, and we'll push people further away from the peace we're trying to secure. So it's absolutely very important that our soldiers get this training and learn to know what's going on inside of them, so that when things are at their absolute worst, that soldier's at his absolute best.
Yeah. Tremendous. That's a vivid illustration of why mindfulness can be so helpful pre-deployment in the field. I mean, you should talk about why mindfulness might be useful post-deployment. When soldiers are coming back, they've had these traumatic, stressful experiences, oftentimes PTSD, other very difficult times coping with some of the experiences they've had. In what way might mindfulness help in that instance as well?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the practice that we started the evening with, right? Where we're instructing to pay attention and notice the mind wandering. And what we know from people experiencing trauma or high stress events is that the mind can get very easily hijacked into rewind, where you're just on a past episode, kind of rubbernecking. You can't get past that past. Or you're fast forwarding, so you're worried about sort of the next event that happens. And we know that disorders like PTSD, that's the prominent part of the symptomology, is that you're getting hijacked in time, which causes the whole cascade of a lot of psychological challenge. And if possible, to provide tools to at least provide them, in this case, it could be a patient or really anybody that's suffering from that, it doesn't have to be full-blown disorder. That there is a way in which you can train your mind to really stay present, really stay, I always think of this MP3 analogy, like not rewind or fast forward, but right on play. If you could train the mind to do that, and then start becoming aware of when your mind wasn't in the present, then you can kind of maybe cut that cycle of stress and of memory, traumatic memory that can be so problematic. Does that make sense? Does that seem to resonate? So that's where I think kind of most fundamentally it relates. And people are now looking at the use of mindfulness training in the VA context. Most of my work actually is in active duty populations. In addition to the active duty service member, the military spouse also. Because their experience of psychological challenge and sort of the cyclical nature of that with the deployment cycle matches that of their spouse. So I think that the use of it, really at this point, a lot of pre-deployment, a lot of post-deployment is also pre-deployment in many ways. And so, I mean, there's the kind of veteran that is now left the military that I think these practices can be very helpful for, as well as those that are going to go back and train to go again. I mean, I think it's a very similar set of challenges.
So while you are currently a meditator, you actually have been able to maintain a personal practice?
I have. I love Dan Harris's book because I'm the kind of guy that's like holding the fish for 5 minutes. It's very hard, especially when you work in the basement of the Pentagon and you're responsible for all operations of the Army.
Are you able to meditate in the Pentagon?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, I had a really rough job. Every day they'd call me at 5 in the morning, give me the update of what happened since they last talked to me, which was a few hours before. And I would be in the building by 6 in the morning. We'd have a meeting at 6:30. I'd have an intelligence briefing by 7, and it would just go, and we'd leave maybe 20, 8 o'clock at night, every night, and then I got a call at 10 o'clock, try to get some sleep back at it. So I learned if I didn't find time in there to meditate. So at first I started with just, I'm going to do this for 5 minutes. I'm going to shut my door. I'm just going to do 5 minutes a day because this job is crazy. I mean, it's going to kill me if I don't do something right. And so that became a little bit longer, and I fenced my time between my last morning meeting and the time I could run over to the little gymnasium we have in the Pentagon, and I fenced some time there. And during the day, when I filled it up again, I would go for walks. I would walk out to the courtyard. I still do that often. Because if people don't like to make eye contact and talk to you in the Pentagon, I mean, they're very high stress, they always have their head down, and it's like zombie land. But so you can go out, you can just go look at something and stare and not be strange, it not be a strange sight, so it's kind of normal behavior. But I found times throughout the day, like even just standing in line, I have a Starbucks problem, my wife is well aware. Standing in line at Starbucks, just noticing the sign, just sitting there and just noticing things, just learn to slow myself down in every free moment I had, which wasn't much, but it helped. And unfortunately, we live next to Arlington Cemetery. When I would run to work and back from there, that was the most humbling of the all. So I'd always try to slow it down and feel it. But on post-traumatic stress, it's just, everybody suffers from post-traumatic stress. And what mindfulness does is it makes you aware of why you're experiencing what you're experiencing. So you don't feel like you're going nuts anymore. You don't feel like you're crazy. And this is what's coming in. It's like the demons are coming in on folks that have been so stressed from traumatic events they've been through. So it is much needed part of the treatment, and much more treatment is needed. Our military has invested a lot, and much more is needed to help our veterans experiencing it. But to practice before, during, and after, I think that's very helpful. But I also feel that to know what's going on, to know that these stressors in your life are doing this to you, not you, and to slow down. I mean, I remember after we did the study and I went back to Georgetown with Liz, we met Congressman Ryan together, Tim Ryan from Ohio. And he said just very simply, I remember reading his Mindfulness book, and he just said this, don't check your BlackBerry in the morning. I don't know if anyone knows what a BlackBerry still is anymore, but at the time, he said, why do that? And I was like that all the time. I would be talking to my wife and I'd be doing 10 emails from work. My son would call me out. He'd just throw a ball at me or something. Or my wife would just make up a story, like, hey, your sister died today. And I'm like, yeah, okay, well, it's fine, it's fine. And I realized just doing that one thing in my life, not checking it the first thing I got up in the morning. And then this last job that I had was so demanding, I had to be by my phone 24 hours a day. On Saturdays, my wife is a very good runner, so I try to keep, I'm in her shadows in that one. We would go for a run, and I would leave my phone at home. And I would unplug, and I would be off the grid, and I'd call the ops center and say, I'm off the grid for a couple hours. And even in that job, we were able to take our moments where we could train and run 2 pretty successful Marine Corps marathons over the last 2 years. So it was that way. But it was physically pulling yourself out. I mean, there's lots of ways to practice. Liz taught us many. A good friend of mine went to Georgetown as a fellow, and he went through her course there, and then he went back and back, many more deployments as an Army Ranger battalion commander for one of the Ranger elite units. And he would do practices before going on an operation. And he just felt like, okay, this is part of my now, it's my preparation so I can be calm. Because you're going into a house at 2 in the morning, you don't know if it's a woman and a baby, or you may have 5 guys in there ready to kill you. You don't know. And it could be either, or it could be both. One in one room and in the other, and you have to be at your utmost attentive state and regulate that stress and not going in all amped up, because you're not going to make the right decision.
So now we've got officers meditating in the Pentagon, we've got grunts meditating in the field. Among the meditation community, and by this I mean the broader kind of Buddhist community out of which a lot of these mindfulness practices have originated, there's some skepticism about this. There's some real concern that these practices that are really intended to bring about enlightenment in the historical context are being used in the context of making better soldiers. Amisha, you've been in the center of this debate. You have good relations with the kind of mindfulness community, but also are clearly working very closely with the military. How do you address this criticism from some hardcore, devout meditators who say it's just inappropriate for mindfulness to be taught in this manner?
Right. Yeah, and I think it's the only time I've actually been like publicly flamed on a blog. I mean, it's a very strange experience for somebody who studies attention to have anything controversial. But I think that part of it is my interest in working on this space was not coming from, I want everybody to become a Buddhist. That was just not my orientation. The second one was that I accepted the reality that we live in a time when we have a military that is currently engaged in combat, and for which there is much suffering and challenge. But I think the answer to your question is really in everything that was just said from somebody who lived it, that what our intention is to produce some way, some program in which we can offer training to help people who are going to be facing such uncertain and challenging circumstances. I mean, I think most civilians can't even understand. And hearing some of his stories, I'm just like, wow, I didn't know that. Well, we want them to be what? More discerning, less reactive, kind, right? Compassionate. And those are the qualities we want to cultivate. So how are we going to get there? I mean, just telling them to be that way is not working. Providing them all these PowerPoint presentations that say, this is the way you need to act is not working. And mindfulness practice seems to be able to do that. So that's the intention. It's to actually, we get criticized for making super soldiers. And I kind of want to unpack that a little bit. Well, what does that mean? I mean, yes, we're dealing with a soldier, but this kind of soldier we want to have is somebody who is able to see, oh, that's a child, don't shoot. And we want a leader, a military leader that says, that's a father, let's talk. I mean, so in my mind, it's an experiment right now. We're just at the beginning stages. We're just at the beginning stages of this research. But everything that I'm seeing suggests that we are getting the results that are in the direction of more discerning, less reactive individuals. We're not getting people that are blindly now violently responding in a rage scenario, which was what I would say is like a crazed soldier. That's not what we're getting. So that's my answer, is that everything's in the direction that we want it to go. And that's part of what we're trying to figure out. It's a bigger puzzle.
Yeah. Walt, do you have a response if you encounter that kind of line of criticism?
Well, I think the criticism may be fair, so I don't know enough about to comment on, but I will just say from the soldier perspective, is that we're not machines, we're not robots. We're men and women from the United States in my army. And we're youth. We grew up here in this country, and we've been asked to do a job, one that we take very seriously. But we're people. And I have a lot of stories I tell. But one story I tell, that this one sergeant I had was one of our best soldiers, and he was having a hard time. We had a really bad fight, And we were in this village at night, it was 2 in the morning, and I just went around to check on the guards. We were really in a remote village. And he looked at me, and we were we were alone, 2 in the morning in Afghanistan. And he told me, he said, "Sir," he said, you like these people, don't you?" And I could tell he was struggling. I brought it out of him. He says, "You know what? I want to kill them. I can't take it anymore. I'm a Christian man, and I just have no respect for this culture, the way they treat their women." And he was really been built up. He was ready to explode. And he was a very talented young man. And I walked him through that, we're not here to judge the culture. We're put here to bring stability and security, and bring hope to people that previously had none. They're victims too. And we've got to help them get on a path here. We may not like what we see, but we've been asked to do a job, and you've got to remain very clear in that moment. And I told soldiers many times that compassion is more powerful than bullets. Because by not acting, you're building something. Once you point a weapon at somebody, or if you shoot somebody, it's a statement. And you have to come back, you have to repair that. But if you start with that repair, and you build more, and you enable and not just disable, and soldiers have to do both, sometimes simultaneously. We'd go to a village in Iraq, and you could fight 2 people, or you could fight 2,000. And the number depended on your actions. And one time we had released a sheikh, his name is Sheikh Shalom, and we're really good friends now, but he was wrongfully arrested, put in the worst prison that the United States had in Iraq. We thought he was enemy number 1. When his brother pleaded for me to get him out of jail, we did a great research on him. We found we were actually wrong. We picked him up doing something that was perceived to be funding Al-Qaeda and insurgents in Iraq, and actually he was paying a bribe to get one of his relatives out. It was a very common practice of kidnapping to raise money for the insurgents. So we saw him doing something, they assumed he was funding it. I did everything we could. We released him. I greeted him at the airfield at midnight in our air base north of Baghdad. And I thought he was going to hate me. But we sat up all night and gave him his sheikh garb. I didn't put him in, I got him out of the orange jumpsuit he was in, and his brother would give me all his clothing. We sat up all night and talked, and he told me, you have the wrong people in jail, and I want to help you. And he helped me, and that day, when he went back to his village, there was about 30,000 people out, all fired weapons in the air. It was a little bit scary, but we never got attacked in that village again. Not once. So I know that there's always going to be criticism of the military. I don't like wars. War is mankind's worst creation. But if we're not prepared for war, we'll never prevent it. And when there's still evil in the world, we have to be prepared for it. And that's what armies do. It's not for everyone. I'm proud to do it. Because I love my country and I want to protect those freedoms. And I understand where that debate could be and how someone could feel like we could wrongfully apply it. But we're not blinding soldiers to act without emotion. We're teaching them how to control their emotion. We're making them more aware. We're not giving them a pill to be a robot and just walk down the street and apply violence without reaction. We're putting them in there. We're putting them in that moment. So they'll see the bad with the good and be able to tell the difference and discern it and not just be reacting to a perceived threat. What would have happened if that soldier would have not seen those men without weapons? We would have killed 30 innocent civilians on that mountain in Afghanistan. I mean, it was my responsibility. And he, like I said, we all saw the same thing, but somehow he saw something more. And it's always going to be like this. So if I ever talk to a critic, I would plead for them not to expand your patent and allow us to explore more and follow the science, because there is goodness coming out of this. And I don't think that anyone can manipulate this to do harm. I really don't see that. So I would plead, please let me continue my practice. Let me in under the tent, please, because I've seen so much of it do so good for so many who are struggling.
That's great. I'm happy for your promotion, but I feel like we could use people like you in Washington these days. We're going to move to questions in just a minute, but I've just got a couple more for Amisha and Walt. Amisha, where's this going? Talk to us about what you see the research and your own work doing in the next couple months and years. Are we going to see this in basic training before long?
Leaders that outside my job, but I think that I wanted to just kind of connect the dots, because remember when we first started this, essentially we had one commander that was willing to let us work with them. And from that, we've done a lot. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of kind of what we're up to now. So even in that first grant, remember the big challenge was how much time. So, because that's the thing that people will not give us. So even in that first project, we wanted to manipulate the dosing. So how much training, what's the least amount of training time we can provide and still see benefits? 24 hours was our kind of upper limit. We've done one project already that suggested that 24 hours over 8 weeks is helpful. But we also had conditions where we had 16 hours of training down to 8 hours of training. So we were down to an hour a week for 8 hours a week. And what we found through the series of studies is that we could see benefits with 8 hours of training. So now we had something where more commanders would be willing to even take a look at it. But part of the puzzle when you move down to 8 hours is like, well, what's gonna go, right? So that was another level of questions. If you're gonna have 8 hours of training, what should that comprise? Should you have exercises like the one we did together where you're just practicing? Or should you just talk about the benefits of mindfulness and have people practice on their own? I mean, one way to think about it is like if you go to a gym and you have a personal trainer, do you want that trainer to do the reps with you or tell you how great exercises? Right? Our hunch was the more you do, the more you'll benefit. That's what we found. So now we've been able to, and this was all in the work that we've done with Liz. We're now to the point where we want to make a more sort of open source model, where we want to benefit from the broader military expertise as well as mindfulness expertise. So our advisory board for some of the grants right now includes John Kabat-Zinn, Sharon Salzberg, General Piatt, and others that are active duty as well as interested in mindfulness. So we've created a program called MBAT, called Mindfulness, it stands for Mindfulness-Based Attention Training. And that now we are, this is beneficial, give it to me, so let me now give it to 100,000 people. It's like, okay, I got one trainer, I've got Liz Stanley right now, right, who's unusual. So how do I go from that to a scalable delivery model? So some of the studies we've been doing now is asking questions about who's the best trainer, because we have a very big need if we want to launch this. So one strategy was to let's tap into the existing mindfulness expertise that we have in our civilian world, right? The mindfulness-based stress reduction available over 750 medical centers around the country. Well, there's certified people that could become trainers. And then if they're able to deliver the training, now all of a sudden we can meet the need. But the other option was, well, that's one strategy you can go, is look at the outside community. The other one was, let's look in-house. Who are Army trainers who are really good at training soldiers, who soldiers like to work with, benefit from? Who are those folks? Maybe teach them kind of firsthand what mindfulness is and then how to deliver the program. So we did sort of a head-to-head. So both a mindfulness-based stress reduction trainer and a set of sports psychologists who were Army experts at training soldiers. We trained both of them in our program. Of course, the sports psychologists didn't know anything about mindfulness, so we spent a long time, about 10 weeks, training them up on that before we even started talking about the program. And then each of them delivered training to soldiers. So we looked to see which group benefited more, and it was the group, this may be surprising, I mean, I didn't know which way it was going to go, which is a great experiment. We really don't know. And either one was going to be a win, right? Because we'd have an answer of who we should train up to scale this delivery. But what we found was that when we compared the MBSR instructor to MBSR instructor's delivery of mindfulness to giving no training at all, there was no difference. It had no effect. But the Army trainers delivering it actually benefited the soldiers. So that was very definitive. It wasn't even ambiguous. It was like, okay. And when you asked them, they're like, yeah, this guy might know what he's talking about. He may know what mindfulness is, but I can't relate to him. And so, and that actually that made sense to me, that they wanted the delivery to be a message that resonated with their life experience and could relate to what their challenges and aspirations may be. And the mindfulness training community, what I'm also learning is that most of MBSR participants really want to be there. There's some motivation that got them there. So in some sense, having a skeptical audience is not what a trainer might be used to. So it's a little more of a complicated answer. Anyway, so now we've got a program, we've got a strategy forward to deliver, and I'm very happy to report that from the days when I was working with General Piatt to convince the division commander at that point to do something, the Army is now launching its own study. They're going to study the effects of MBAT in-house from their research transition office. So that's a really good sign. That means that now they may, if they see it's of value to do the full study, they may have a path forward of disseminating it.
Terrific. General Piatt, you're headed up to Fort Drum. Is Mindfulness coming to the 10th Mountain soon?
On the day we take over command, Lucy's coming. We're going to talk to command. So we are. We did one previously there. Last time we were there with spouses. She's doing one out at Seattle with the unit, and I think we'll be hopefully soon. We'll be back in Fort Drum. But I think your answer is we've got to get it in basic training. We've got to figure out what's the right approach to this. Because the Army, we really understand it's comprehensive fitness. It's our program now, but now we have a better way to do mental fitness, and we'll pursue it. I think we'll get there. It's not fast, but it's the Army's a big organization, so it'll take some time. But more and more we have leaders that are convinced, and they start to see, especially athletes for the younger soldiers, big business model. Your book was fabulous. I just finished it this morning, but it was. That kind of exposure, when senior leaders read that and see it, they're going to get interested too. So I still got some work to do, but I'm still optimistic.
Good stuff. Let's open it up to questions. Yeah, I was coming around with the microphone. Right here in the front we have one.
Thank you, both of you, for coming. So I have two questions. One is that for those of us that have family members that are veterans or in the military, often, this population is, they're like kind of like alpha males, and this is just seen as something that's, fluffy, and how can we kind of start that, encourage them to begin a practice?
Let's ask the alpha male on the stage.
And then the other question was just that, has there been any thoughts of expanding this to like police officers and whatnot?
Yeah, well, you can comment on, but absolutely police officers, because they have a very, very difficult job. Much like a soldier on patrol in Baghdad or Afghanistan, I mean, they're doing it every day. And they have to discern targets all the time, and you can see the trouble we have when it goes wrong. And so I have a lot of respect for police officers because their life is always a threat. They're always on. They have to live on amber, always scanning their sector for a threat. That puts great stress on your body like soldiers. I would tell one that we're not all alpha males. I think we see the experienced soldiers. I think they learn that I've always said to our brigade that you can control more if you subordinate yourself. So sometimes I think you just have to talk things through with, if you have a family member. We have several friends that have gone through some really difficult times that have not come out of it. I mean, it's very sad to watch, but I can tell as soon as I look at them when they come back from a deployment or they come back from something that they're not dealing with that trauma, and they don't understand what's happening to their body. You have to confront it. If you have a loved one that's been from a deployment or some traumatic experience, you have to confront it in a kind, compassionate way, but they need to know that you're there. And sometimes that love of a significant other or family member is going to help you get through this, because there are some very dark days you're going to experience, and it's very real. And they will do everything in their power to fool you that they're experiencing difficulties. And they will bring on the alpha male as a shield to why they're not really suffering. We go through fire when a soldier falls in combat to save his or her life. There's nothing we wouldn't do for a fellow combat. But when they come back from deployment, we ignore it. We think, oh, we're home, everything's fine. It's the more dangerous place post-deployment, because everyone around you is normal and acting normal, and you're not normal. And it really tears you apart inside, and you can't deal with it. You see these soldiers, but they put on a very good front. And that's really where the alpha male comes out. I don't need that stuff. But when you watch a professional football player or a pitcher for the Chicago Cubs who beat my Pirates last year, if it's good enough for them to pause and perform at an optimal level with some of the most difficult sports things, physical challenges you do, that alpha male soldier or Marine, they can see the goodness in that. You get them to someone it'll connect the dots for them. We do a lot when soldiers come back to get them into training that gets their blood up a little bit, and we thought that would be helpful, helping them deal with stress to get them back in that environment. We're actually stressing them more. So I would latch on to them. I'll let the scientists answer it, but I'll tell you, I don't know the science behind it, but I can see it when they're not dealing with it. And you'll see it. They'll stay up late, a lot of alcohol, drug abuse, all these things, irritable, snap at you like in a second, and then just say, I'm fine. That's just a bunch of crap that they're doing. It's your mind. I mean, this isn't some, some kind of conceptual or weak or something that's beneath you. It's your mind. It's your mind, and you've got to confront it. So, sorry for that long answer.
Well, one part of the answer is like play a clip of that to your family member, because I think that hearing it from somebody who's actually lived that is very compelling. But I will tell you that we have worked with many different groups that I would put probably all in that. Right, my husband always says, you like to work with these high testosterone groups. So we've worked with the entire University of Miami football team. And we actually just got the paper accepted, so I'm very happy, in which we offered mindfulness training and relaxation training to the whole team and put them head to head to find that only the mindfulness training really resulted in the intentional performance benefits. We've worked with the entire Miami-Dade Fire Department back in Florida. First responders are a big community that now is seeing that there's some way in which mindfulness training may be helpful. Really because it's low cost, low tech, highly accessible. And now that these other groups are finding benefits, they're kind of seeing, oh, maybe we can do this as well. So I think that those are part of what might help.
And to answer your second question, many police departments around the country are incorporating mindfulness training. Not everyone, certainly not prevalent enough, but it's happening. Yeah. So I know we had a question in the front row.
First of all, it's very inspiring to listen to, everything that you've been saying, because I feel like what I've been picking up on is that there seems to be a lot of rigidity in that people are very used to thinking in kind of one mindset in one way, and being open-minded to thinking in a different way, I think takes a lot of bravery. So, thank you. And also, a question that I had is that when you had mentioned that you kind of prescribed this, program to a lot of different soldiers, and then there was a group that kind of came back, with some positive benefits, and then there was a group that you think had grew even more and had kind of reaped even greater benefits. So what do you think contributes to, like, what separates, I guess, is really my question, people that come back, with a little bit, I guess, what's differentiates the soldiers that come back, with a little bit more, easier transition to kind of what and that's like.
So here's just to kind of clarify what you're saying. There's absolutely going to be individual differences in how people cope with high stress situations, right? There's a lot of factors that could go into that. What I was talking about wasn't so much how individuals differ just on their response to going through high stress. It was how it relates to their participation in the program, right, that we offered. So we offered the mindfulness training. We tracked how much they practiced during our program. And what we found is those that just sat in the class but never practiced did not benefit. It's as if it was a waste of time. But those that practiced benefited, and the amount that they benefited was related to how much they practiced. So in one of the first studies, we found that the magic number was about 12 minutes a day. If they practiced 12 minutes a day, which was actually kind of shocking, because like MBSR asks for 45 minutes a day. We had assigned 30 minutes a day. Nobody was doing 30 minutes a day. But around 12 minutes or more, they would either stay stable over time or actually improve. So the key for us was that how much they actually practiced. Now, why do some people practice more than others is a complicated question. One thing that we found is sort of this kind of personality feature of openness to new experiences, and also prior experiences being deployed. So I don't know, does that answer your question? Okay.
Right up here in the front, yeah. Maybe just speak up.
Yes, I can speak up. So I'm a mindfulness trainer for health professionals, and I'm really interested in how, your advice on how we use those 8 hours. What do you put into those 8 hours, And does that differ for people who are dealing with PTSD versus those who aren't?
I mean, first of all, I'd say the only answer I have right now about the groups on which the 8 hours is beneficial is non-clinical groups, right? So I think that definitely there may be changes when you're dealing with clinical populations. So that's one kind of categorical thing I'll say. In terms of the composition of the 8 hours, I mean, we're really building it off a mindfulness-based stress reduction model, right? So part of it is this foundational set of practices that have to do with cultivating concentrative expertise through the kind of practice that we did. The other parts are really about open monitoring, right? Or in the football context, we say scan the field. Like some of these things that we've had to do is for focus, we'd say eye on the ball, right? So for what to do about attention to thoughts or mindfulness of thoughts and labeling thoughts is drop the story. So we'd have, the modules are built that way. For open awareness, scan the field. And then, of course, when it has to do with compassion and kindness, which is another part of the module, right? So concentrated practices, open monitoring, and then compassion practices as the suite of practices that we offer. For compassion, it would be one team, right? So now if you can at least start saying, okay, for the person on my team, I definitely have this affiliative wanting them to do well and not suffer. And then we expand out beyond that. So that maybe gives you a sense of how we do it. But the key in all of this is that we take the training program and always make it relevant to the group that we're working with. So with the football team, my graduate student was actually on the Northwestern football team. So he was like our translator. How do I make these, all these phrases came from him saying, if you said that to me, I would pay attention. Same thing with soldiers. What is the right language? That's why having it as more of an open source project where we're collaborating people that have lived that life, they're telling us how to contextualize it. Without the contextualizing, I don't think we'd see the benefits.
And you will get an alpha male if you tell them to focus on eating a raisin. That was the one we had. So that's just not going to translate well. So it was really, a lot of Mishi's work by translating that language, because, scan your sector, eyes on the ball, these kind of things, they mean things to these different groups so they understand it right away. And now you got it. But you want me to focus on chewing a raisin? It's like,
It's a very common MBSR practice. Yeah.
No,
it can always
very,
relate to other
I mean, I got what they were saying, but then the soldiers look at you like, okay,
Yeah.
you're a real wacko. So what are you doing to me here?
So there's no difference for people who might be dealing with PTSD or...
I'm sorry, I didn't answer that. I can't, there's definitely going to be a difference, because I'll tell you, in the kind of patient groups that we've worked with, which have primarily been adults with ADHD, the key thing that we see is that the way in which the program is offered is going to have to be different, right? So for example, I'll give you the context that I know well. In the adults with ADD that we offered the mindfulness training to, we could never even think about saying, okay, you're going to sit for 45 minutes. It's like, yeah, no. We started with a 1-minute practice. After 8 weeks, they were up to something like 10 to 12 minutes. The homework exercises we give them wouldn't be silence. It would be you hear a little ding every 10 seconds for the 1 minute. And some of our participants would say they just played all day long. It's like, it's really helpful to kind of come back every 10 seconds. So I don't know, it's not my area. I don't know exactly what the translation would be, but I know a lot of people are actually actively looking to see how to modify programs so that PTSD patients can benefit. And MBSR has been offered with success, and those studies have been published.
I think we have time for one more question on the aisle here.
Hi there, my name is Anuradha, and I've been looking forward to this event. I'm sorry I missed the opening, I had to come from something, but I was a Marine Corps officer, served for 5 years, and I spent about the last decade teaching yoga and meditation to veterans in New York City, so this is really close to home for me. I kind of come to this with a little bit of skepticism myself, because I used yoga and meditation, I'll call it meditation, to heal from trauma that I sort of suffered from the military. So, hold this one off.
And so I think the piece that's missing for me, because I understand the value of concentration practice of MBSR, and I give this is all old stuff for me, but is about harm. And I use that word deliberately. So it's not just compassion, but I do believe the military has a very different mission than the police force, than law enforcement, than the fire department, than a football team, which is, you know, and the general can sort of relate to this, is, you know, as a Marine officer, I was trained to kill with gusto, right? So when I left the Marines after 5 years, I had bloodlust. I don't think there's any other way to put it. It wasn't random. I was actually a fairly peaceful person going in, so, you know, great drill instructors. But it's the reason I turned to practices like yoga or meditation is because I need a transformation, right? I need a healing. So something so deep that happens from these practices. And so in the larger, you know, Buddhist community that you're all referring to, I think the concern is very fundamental about, so what does it mean to kill, or to be trained to kill, or to cause harm, because sometimes we must in an institution that is a war-fighting institution. And what does it mean to be the recipient of it as well? You know, as a woman in the Marines, it was not a kind place for women. So harm, you know, either inflicted upon others or upon yourself, or these modalities helped me really confront that in the mirror and in myself. So what I'm concerned about is when soldiers or Marines are coming back with post-traumatic stress or depression, other anxiety disorders, emotional pain. You know, I don't think it's enough to stop at concentration, right? It requires something so much more than that. And unless you plant that seed from the get-go, I think we're not serving our service members well. So yeah, just your response. I know that was a lot.
Well, just to reiterate what I said a moment ago, and I'd love to hear Bill's comments on this. It's not just concentration. So that's just to be clear, because I understand what you're saying. This is going to be a whole suite of practices which are working together to result in some kind of benefit. So just know that that's part of it. The other part I would say is, well, actually, I don't want to say anymore. I actually want to ask you to respond.
I wanted to thank you for your service. You just described, you know, what we all go through. It's an individual journey when you deploy to combat and you see the evils of the world and the places that we've been. It's evil, and you're put into that mix, and then you have to come back and try to come back to normalcy, and try to come back and be a dad and be a husband and be a member of society. It's an impossible mission without help. So this is just one part that I found that was helping us deal with the stressors, just one piece of it, because I believe there's a holistic thing that has to happen to reintegrate our soldiers, because many of them are scarred very seriously. But the first one is, at least we're recognizing that we've been under that stress, and some of the hardest things we have to deal with is the harm that we have done to others. Psychologically, it's very difficult for me to do it, but I've done it, but I have to live with it. And I do know there's a part of our military that we are training in military actions. We have to fight and win our nation's wars. That's what we have to be prepared to do. But we have to win. And if we can win without killing, it's winning, not killing. So that I always remind soldiers, we're not just training you to kill. We're training you to employ the proper amount of force to outmaneuver your enemy, to put yourself in a position of advantage against your adversaries so that you can either deter aggression, but if deterrence fails, we have to be able to use the lethality, and we train for that. And I mean, you've obviously trained for that. The Marine Corps is very good at this. But you also got to remember, we're human beings that you put us into this formation and told us how to maneuver and go kill a fellow human being. You can call them whatever you want. You can dehumanize that opposition. You can call them, you know, our enemy, or you can surround it with terms of honor and glory and all these things that just ignore what's really happening. A human being is moving out to kill another human being. You've got to get it down to that level if we're going to be real about helping one another back through this journey. And I'm not sure you ever heal. I mean, life is very hard. I mean, I don't mean to get so philosophical here, but I think you're right. But what I found in this practice is that we're teaching soldiers to understand what's going on, what stressors are doing to their mind, and their ability to discern the environment that we're putting them in. So anything that could give them clarity in that very difficult and violent place, help them all in. But it's not the answer. I love the yoga practices. I incorporate a lot of physical fitness in with soldiers, a lot of dietary, eating right, getting to be a better partner again to the person you love, just being a better human. It's hard to go do the things that many of us have done and see the things that we have seen, and then come back and then try to say you're normal now and just go back to it. That's an impossible mission. And so many of our veterans need our help to pull them through this. And I'm not suggesting that I'm out. I don't know where out is. I mean, it's constantly with me, but I'm recognizing for what it is. And these very bad moments in my life are constantly replaying in my mind that are spiraling me into disorder and not allowing me to live in the moment that I'm at now. I've learned not to judge the things in my past. That I was trained to do something, I had to do something. And I think your point is a very good point. I want to thank you for your service. Continue to do what you're doing to bring others out of that. But it's the ugliness of our world that requires something so terrible as war. But I'm still convinced if we are not prepared to fight those wars, we will suffer the alternative of not. And I don't think we'll like those results. The freedoms that we hold dear and the freedoms that we try to give others will be taken from us. So there are many that have to do it. Nobody wants that fight. But when the wolf comes and attacks the herd, the sheepdog has got to go after the wolf. And we still need in our society people that are willing to go do that. And we've got to commit to help them once they do, to get them the best trained when they do it, and to bring them back home and treat them with dignity and respect within that formation, and to bring them back to normalcy however we can. And that commitment is a role that all of society has to help in honoring our veterans. So thanks for the question. I hope I answered it somewhat, but thank you for your service.
Well, just one last thing I'd say is that, again, as I said before, there are so few people that have your life experience. And I ask that we continue to dialogue about it, because I think that you probably found what I said unsatisfactory, and that's the beginning point of a conversation. Because our ultimate, I think our vision is the same. We want to work toward what you already articulated. But it's not that clear how to do that. Even if you hold the same vision, how to get there is a complicated answer with a lot of limitations. So just know that I would very much like to continue.
Thank you for your question. Gail, Amishi, General Piatt, thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you so much again to our guests. Thank you all for coming. This conversation will be on our YouTube page in a week or so for Global Spiritual Life and Mindful NYU. And you can also hear it on our podcast, Multi-Faithful, in about 2 weeks. And we hope to see you again soon. Have a wonderful night, and thank you.
Thank you.